Well, 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 Snow White, the controversial Disney princess live action remake, has finally landed on Disney Plus, which means I had to watch it for the first time and give my review. This film has received a lot of backlash in the past year. It did not do very well at the box office, in fact, it bombed, and it got terrible reviews from audiences and the internet critics alike. But was this film really all that bad? Was it really the woke dumpster fire that online critics say it was? Or was it actually an okay movie for kids? Well, that's what we are here to talk about today on the Fairytale Cocktails channel. I'm going to give my review of the Snow White live action film and tell you what I really thought of the Disney classic remake. But first, welcome back to Fairytale Cocktails, where we discuss fairy tales while sipping our favorite fairy tale themed cocktail. Today, I am sipping on the Snow White, a cocktail that includes 2 ounces of apple vodka, 1 ounce cinnamon schnapps, 1 ounce apple cider, 1 ounce cranberry juice, garnished with an apple slice and cinnamon stick. You can find this recipe and many more in the Disney Princess Cocktails recipe book available on Amazon, or check out the Fairytale Cocktails blog for more fairy tale themed cocktail recipes and fairy tale themed entertaining tips. Links are in description below. But back to my review on the movie. Okay, here it goes. I will give my thoughts in no particular order. Just for reference, I have actually watched this movie twice since it has been released on streaming. And overall, I will say that the movie was not as bad as I thought it would be. I don't think it was as terrible or as ridiculous as the internet made it out to be. But that doesn't mean it wasn't bad. So, like I said, in no particular order, I'm going to talk about the things that stood out to me and why I think that this wasn't a very great movie and why I don't think it will be put down in Disney classic history, or why I think this movie failed and their live action movies will continue to fail unless they fix these key things. So the very first thing I think that really stood out to me was the costumes. And I know that many people have talked about this already, that Snow White's costume in particular looked incredibly cheap. It looked like something you would get at the Spirit of Halloween store. The entire time I was watching the movie and watching Rachel Zegler in her Snow White costume, I kept thinking that she looks like a little girl who is trick-or-treating in a Snow White costume. That was the quality of the dress. It just looked very fake. It looked very cheap. It did not look very royal, very grand. It really looked like it was a joke. I found that there was just so much wrong with the costume. It was too short for her, I think. It looked nothing like what a real royal princess would wear. It was too brightly colored. I just cannot, for the life of me, understand why that would go through, why a costume designer would design the dress in that way. It is like there was no effort whatsoever put into the costume. Even the corset part, it just looked fake. It wasn't even a real corset. It did nothing for Rachel Zegler's figure. It was just there. And it was very disappointing because the dress is what makes the Disney princesses so iconic. So that was a really big disappointment. But it wasn't just Rachel Zegler. Gal Gadot's character as the evil queen also did not have a great costume. I will say that hers looked better than Rachel Zegler's, than the Snow White costume, but it still looked really bad. When watching the film, especially her big number where she's singing and she has her song, I couldn't help but think that she just looks exactly like a Disney performer at Disney World who is cosplaying as the evil queen. The quality was not much better than a costumed Disney character at the park. But remember, this is a movie that took hundreds of millions of dollars to make. So why weren't the costumes better? Why weren't the costumes for the 2 key actresses in this film, why didn't they look more realistic? Why didn't they look more iconic? They literally looked like Halloween costumes. So that was the very first thing I noticed that I think really took you out of the fantasy, at least as an adult, is that the costumes looked very bad. Now, for a younger audience, I'm not so sure that it would matter. However, again, in Snow White's case, I don't think it did much to flatter her, and I think that what makes Disney princesses memorable is that they look iconic, they look beautiful, they look grand, but when you put Rachel Zegler in a costume that does nothing for her, it takes away from her ethereal look that she's supposed to have as a Disney princess. Now let's talk about the acting a little bit, in particular, Gal Gadot. Now, Gal Gadot is beautiful. She's a beautiful actress, but she's terrible. She's a terrible actress. She's not very good at her craft. She may have been okay in other roles, but this was not the role for her. On top of that, she's a very terrible singer. I think she really ruined the key performance, the key song the Evil Queen had. I think it could have been an okay song if it wasn't her singing it or acting it out. Musical numbers is just not her thing. Was not the right fit for this. I think she was terribly miscast. I cannot imagine who would have approved this. Again, with all the money put into this film, why did they think that she was the best person for this role? I have to wonder, did she even have to audition? Was there really a casting director or the main director who saw this, saw her performance and thought she was good for the part? I can't imagine that anyone would. So I can only imagine maybe she didn't audition. Maybe she was given the part for whatever reason. I'm not sure. I just don't understand why she was cast in this role. That's just my opinion. Everything is my humble opinion on this show or on this channel. And speaking of acting, I have to say, I do not think that Rachel Zegler's acting was much better. Now, she was better than Gal Gadot, do not get me wrong, and she definitely can sing. I know that her background is in musical theater. I have not seen anything else that Rachel Zegler was in, but I've heard from other people that I think she is a better actress in those other films. I think that singing is more her thing. I think she is more a musical theater artist, and I could tell in her acting, she did seem like she was on a Broadway show. I mean, I think there is a different acting styles for being in a play versus being in a movie. I got the sense from Rachel that was more her style. So again, while I do think that she was better than Gal Gadot or Gal Gadot, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, I don't think it was that much better. To be fair though, she was acting pretty much 90% of the time with CGI characters and also in CGI backgrounds. So I can't imagine that really helped things, because it's one thing to feed off the energy of another character or a real person, a real human being in a scene, and another thing to have to pretend that you are talking to dwarves or talking to animal characters, or even pretend that you are in the dwarves cabin when really you're just on a green screen set, right? So I can imagine that was not easy. I think that her parts when she was with real people were a little bit better, but her acting was not amazing. It was a little bit cringy, in my opinion. I also think something I noticed, and this is maybe a little bit nitpicky, but she had a weird thing going on with her jaw that I think it was very overacted, and it just stuck out to me. And I think, again, it really just it didn't do much for her. However, I will say, I think this is more the director's fault for not noticing it or not picking up on it while they were filming, and he or she should have told Rachel Zegler to be more aware of this thing she has with her lower jaw. Again, unless he liked it, I don't know. I just found it it didn't do anything for her. Again, will children notice this? And remember, children are the main audience for this film, I understand. So will they notice these little details? Probably not. But sometimes these little details do add up in the grand scheme of things, which I will get to later on in this review. But back to the other things I noticed about this movie, which I think contributed to it just not doing very well in the box office and it not going to be a Disney classic in the future. So I think the scary woods scene that happens right after Snow White is banished from the kingdom, right after the queen's main man was supposed to kill her, that is a very major plot point in the original film. And I remember, because being a child and watching that film, that was very scary. I think it was a very scary part of the film and very ingrained into our childhood memories. There was even a Disney ride called Snow White's Scary Adventure, and the way it was animated with the music and just with the acting and Snow White running through the woods, it was very scary, and it really tugged at something in your emotions. Like, it felt, you could feel how terrified Snow White was, this young girl who was about to be killed and banished from her kingdom. She had to go into these scary woods that were pulling at her clothes and turning into monsters in her imagination. Now, in this live action film, I think a couple of things that were wrong with that is that, number one, it was all CGI, so it just did not feel very real, and you could tell by the way that Rachel Zegler was acting it. Again, I can't imagine what it's like to have to pretend that all these things are happening. And again, she's probably on a green screen, so I cannot fault her too much for maybe not giving her best performance, but you did not get the sense that she was really all that terrified. I think the CGI was very bad. It did not feel like there was a real threat, and the scene ended really quickly. I think it was very brushed over when it was supposed to be a big part of the story. So I think they had a missed opportunity with that could have been better, and that could have set the tone more for the movie. I think another big problem with the movie and with Rachel Zegler as Snow White is that she just did not feel iconic enough. Now, I am not even going to touch on the controversy of her not being actually fair-skinned like she is in the original. While I understand that some fans do get upset about live action remakes not casting people who look like the original characters, for me personally, I do not mind so much when they race swap characters or when they choose to switch things up a little bit in the remakes. It does not really bother me. I don't think it really is all that necessary when you are telling a fairy tale or something like even like Snow White. That is just my opinion. However, that does not mean that I think just anyone should be cast for these parts if you want the movie to be good. I think at the very least, the actresses should look like a Disney princess. And by Disney princess, I mean that they should be beautiful and iconic, something that little girls want to aspire to, something that little girls want to live vicariously through. In my opinion, I do not think that Rachel Zegler was that. I do not think that she was beautiful or iconic enough. Now, wait a minute. I do not mean that Rachel Zegler is not beautiful. In fact, she is. If you look at her in her real life pictures, she is a stunning girl. In this movie, I think they did her dirty. She does not look as beautiful as she could. It is a mixture of the hair, the makeup or lack of makeup they put on her, the colors, the lighting. There was just everything wrong with how they styled her, and I cannot figure out why they did it. My only reasoning that I can surmise is possibly they wanted to make her look more relatable, maybe, to regular girls. They didn't want to have this beautiful Disney princess, iconic looking girl because they want her to be a regular girl. That is the only reason I can come up with as to why they would do this to Rachel Zegler, because she just did not look iconic. I think she looked like I said, a little girl trick-or-treating as Snow White. And I do think that this is where children actually do notice because, like I said, again, little girls love princess movies because we love looking at beautiful princesses. Even as adult women like to look at magazines of beautiful women. We like the supermodels. We like the Victoria's Secret models because that is something we can aspire to. It is not that we are looking to find ourselves in these women. It is that we are trying to live vicariously through them. It is something to look up to, something to fantasize about. And I think that is what Disney movies are, in particular Disney princess movies. They are fantasy. We want to live our fantasies through these princesses. So I think when you have Rachel Zegler, who they really downplayed her beauty, they gave her terrible hair, they did terrible things with her makeup, they gave her a Spirit of Halloween costume. It did nothing for her. She does not look iconic. She does not look beautiful. And she's just someone that little girls are just meh. They don't want to dress up like her for Halloween because they don't want to be her. So I think that is another reason why this movie will not go down in Disney movie history, because it's just not something that little girls will remember. It's not going to be ingrained into their mind. And then speaking of characters and movies being ingrained into our minds, I think the music plays a part in that as well. They took out Snow White's classic song, which was Someday My Prince Will Come, which was a very catchy song, which is something that I think every little girl can remember and sing along to. Rachel Zegler does have a beautiful voice, and she did get some good songs in this film, but I don't think that little girls will be singing along to her I Want song because it just wasn't catchy enough. It wasn't something I think that little girls can relate to. I think there were some other really good songs in the film, the Whistle While You Work, Hi Ho. I was not mad at the music whatsoever, and I really love Rachel Zegler's voice. She's got a gorgeous, gorgeous voice. But again, I don't think that her I Want song was iconic enough for it to be remembered. Okay, now we get to the dwarves. So in the original film, the dwarves were the heroes of the film. They were one of the main characters. The entire film really was about Snow White and her relationship with these dwarves, the people who took her in when she was down in her luck and she wanted to help them out. She thought they were children at first, and so she was going to, be their mom in a way and help them clean their house and make food for them. And they really loved her for that. And they looked up to her as almost like a mother figure, and they had a really great relationship. So much so that they were, like I said, the heroes of the film. And when the evil queen gave Snow White the poisoned apple, the dwarves went after her and they killed her. They avenged Snow White's death, and they were so incredibly saddened by her death that they put her into a beautiful glass coffin so they could just still admire her even in her death, because they didn't want to leave her. They wanted her to be with them always. So while I thought the dwarves, they were cute characters, I liked the voice actors, I liked their scenes, the CGI I do think took away from the dwarves' time to shine. I really think it kind of made made a mockery, I think, of the dwarves a little bit. It was very bad CGI. It was very awkward to look at. And I know that Disney changed the movie or the script so that they would have CGI dwarves instead of real people because they did not want to be offensive to little people. Now, I can't speak on the perspective of little people since I am not a little person. I have heard different points of views from other people, though, however, and in my opinion, I do almost feel like this was actually a worse move for little people. I feel like because we all know the dwarves are supposed to be dwarves, they are supposed to be also magical creatures, just like a human woman playing a witch is also a human, but also a magical creature in the movie. So I think that if you were to have a real dwarf person playing a magical dwarf in a movie, I don't know why that would be as offensive. But regardless, I think in a way having the dwarves a CGI almost dehumanized little people even more. That is just my opinion. I think it almost made even more of a mockery of a little person because the CGI dwarves were just so ridiculously looking. But that could just be my opinion. Like I said, I am not a little person, so I cannot speak for them. But I also did not like how their importance in the film was really underplayed. Like I said, in the original film, they were the heroes. In this film, they were just kind of there. They took away the dwarves' one heroic act, which was to avenge Snow White's death by killing the queen. In the live action, they actually didn't really do much of anything. They helped her get back to the kingdom, but in the end, it was actually one of the bandits who saved Snow White's life by shooting the dagger out of the evil queen's hand, right? So it wasn't the dwarves. So I think, again, it just kind of underplayed their role entirely in this film, even though it was supposed to be Snow White and the seven dwarves. Like I said, they were just kind of there. They had a good song and that was it. Finally, I think the ending scene of Snow White walking with all the villagers up to the evil queen's castle, I think it was just a little bit cringy. Again, maybe that's a little bit nitpicky. I think maybe it could have had a better, more empowering ending. Overall, did I think that this was a woke dumpster fire that was preaching communism, as people on the internet are saying? I really don't think so. I actually think that the changes they made in the writing and the story were not that drastic. I think they actually did make more sense for a modern audience. Remember, this is a longer live action film, so they did have to add more to the story than the original film. I think that giving Snow White a little more of a personality and a little more of a voice made sense. I think at least for real life, especially in today's world, I think there was nothing wrong with her wanting to be a little bit stronger and wanting to take back her kingdom. They in no way turned her into a so-called crazy feminist badass babe who all of a sudden was 5'2" and 100 pounds and could wield a blade like a seasoned warrior who had been fighting their entire life. They did not do that in that film, which I think was a good move on this part. I don't think that Disney princesses or women need to show their strength in fighting physically, because I do think that women show our strength in other ways, and I do think that this Snow White did that pretty well. I think that she was a stronger character. I think there was some good character progression in that she started off not being very brave, which makes sense because she was a young girl who had an evil stepmother. So I think that made sense. I think she did find her voice. So I did like that part. But like I said, as far as like the dwarves' involvement in the story, I think they made some changes I don't think they needed to make. That was one of them. And as far as the love interest, I like that they kept the love interest, and that was good to see that they did have that. I think it might have been a little more exciting if he were a prince. Maybe he could have been like a rebel prince or something that was also a bandit. But I think it would have felt more fairy tale if he had also been a prince or something maybe a little higher above than just a bandit like he was in the film. Again, just my personal opinion. But I did like the love story they had between the two. Overall, though, I will say the film felt like a high school play. A very elaborate high school play, but still very juvenile. For kids, it might be okay. It might be an okay watch, but I don't think it will ever be anything that will go down in Disney history. And I would also argue that children are more aware of great cinema than maybe we would think. And I think there is a reason why the Disney movies of the past are so iconic, why they are so memorable, why they still stand out today, why even kids of every generation flock to those movies, even though some of these movies are almost 100 years old. And that is because they were good movies. They had good writing. They had good storytelling. They had good characters. They had good artistry, they had good costumes, they had all the key factors that make a good movie. And I think children can pick up on that even when they're very young. And that is why these movies are so ingrained in their memories. And that is why they become classics, because the children remember them. They show them to their own children and the cycle continues. So I think when you have movies that are just meh, they're just not very good, I think children might watch them for a little bit. They might watch them if it's on TV, but I don't think they're going to feel the same connection to these characters, because even they can tell when something is just not good, when they just don't connect with it. It's not going to be ingrained in their minds like these classic Disney tales were before. And that is why the movies are bombing, not just because the adults don't like them, but because the children just aren't connecting with them the same. So that is why I would argue that Disney does need to get its crap together and start making better movies if they want to save their brand, because it is not just about us Disney adults, it is about the kids. The kids will flock to better cinema. They either consciously or subconsciously can tell the difference between a good movie and a bad movie, and it's all about the connection. So when the Disney storytellers of today try to just make a movie to make a buck and just put really good graphics in there, really good music, it's going to fall flat if the story does not measure up, if the story is not something that little kids can connect to. So final consensus on the Snow White movie live action remake: it was just okay. It was watchable, but it is nothing that is going to become a classic. Okay movies never become classics. Only great movies become classics. When they're not enjoyable for kids or adults, then no one wants to watch them. Anyhow, guys, thanks so much for watching Fairytale Cocktails. Don't forget to like and subscribe and comment below with your own thoughts on the Snow White live action remake. Did you watch it? Are you a fan? Am I being too harsh, or am I not being harsh enough? Until next time, cheers, and remember, keep your dreams big, your cocktails strong, and your fairy tales fabulous.